Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're plunging headfirst into one of humanity's most, well, enduring mysteries. The strange, the unexplained, the things that really make us pause and wonder if there's more to reality than meets the eye. We're talking about phenomena often labeled paranormal. Things like telepathy, those incredibly vivid near-death experiences, or even the chilling ancient idea of ghosts. For centuries, these experiences have captivated us, puzzled us, and left us with this sort of gnawing question, how can these things possibly happen? And there's the rub, isn't it? Our dominant scientific view, what we commonly call materialism, it fundamentally tells us that matter, the physical stuff of the universe, is the most basic fundamental thing. Our consciousness, our thoughts, our feelings, everything that makes us us, well, that's just a complex byproduct of our brains. It's like saying your mind is simply the steam rising from a kettle, right? A secondary effect of the boiling water. Now, this model has been incredibly successful at explaining the physical world, there's no doubt about that. But when it comes to these, let's call them anomalous experiences, materialism simply doesn't have a good way to explain them. I mean, how can thoughts travel directly between people if they're supposedly confined to individual skulls? How can someone have vivid, coherent experiences when their brain is, clinically non-functional? For scientists operating within this framework, it really is like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. They're often forced to either deny these phenomena outright, maybe dismiss them as delusion or fraud, or they invent increasingly complicated, sometimes even fantastical extra explanations just trying to make them fit. But what if our fundamental assumption about reality is simply, well, inverted? What if we've got the whole picture backwards? Today, we're introducing a radical, yet I think profoundly compelling idea from the philosopher and computer scientist Bernardo Kastrup. He offers a completely different way to look at reality, one where consciousness isn't an afterthought, not a byproduct, but the very foundation of everything that exists. Our mission in this deep dive is to unpack Kastrup's rigorous and honestly elegant framework of metaphysical idealism. We'll explore how, by simply flipping our usual assumptions on their head, his philosophy doesn't just make room for these strange events, it actually predicts them. We're going to reframe these so-called supernatural occurrences. Show them not as violations of nature's laws, but as natural, maybe rare, but natural expressions of reality's fundamental nature. So settle in, because we're about to embark on a journey that could challenge everything you thought you knew about consciousness, the universe, and maybe even your place within it. Okay, let's unpack this. When we say mainstream materialism, it's more than just a scientific theory, right? It's a worldview many of us maybe subconsciously just adopt. It's almost the default setting for how we understand ourselves and the world around us. So, for you listening, maybe folks who aren't deeply steeped in philosophical terms, can you quickly outline what that means for how we see ourselves in the world?
That's a great place to start, yeah. At its core, materialism is the idea that matter, physical substance, is the only fundamental reality. Imagine the universe as this gigantic, intricate machine made of tiny physical bits, atoms, particles, forces, the drill. And everything, absolutely everything, including our thoughts, our feelings, our very sense of self, arises purely from these complex physical processes. Our consciousness, in this view, it's seen as simply an emergent property of our brain chemistry, like sophisticated electrical and chemical activity happening inside our skulls. It's a bit like the heat generated by a computer, maybe. An output, a byproduct, but not fundamental to the computer itself. And look, this model has been incredibly effective in fields like physics, chemistry, medicine. It explains so much about how the physical world works.
Absolutely. And it has given us tremendous technological advancements and a real understanding of the physical world. But where does it truly hit a wall? Especially with the kinds of phenomena we're discussing today, things like apparent mind-to-mind communication or those really vivid near-death experiences.
Well, the conflict is stark, and it's persistent. If consciousness is strictly confined to our individual brains, just an output of neural activity, then phenomena like telepathy become, well, conceptually impossible. How could thoughts or emotions travel directly between two people's brains without any known physical medium? No sound waves, no light waves, no measurable electromagnetic signals. It seems to defy every known law of physics about how information gets transferred. And similarly, with near-death experiences or NDEs, the challenge is maybe even more profound. How can someone report these vivid, coherent, often highly structured experiences, sometimes even claiming to perceive accurate details from outside their body? When their brain is severely compromised, maybe flatlining or clinically non-functional, when there's no measurable brain activity, the materialist model just cannot account for such rich internal experience. It's a fundamental disconnect.
Right. So it's not just a matter of, oh, we don't understand it yet, but that these experiences seem to fundamentally contradict the core ideas of materialism. So how does the materialist framework typically respond when it's confronted with these kinds of challenges? Does it just sort of ignore them?
According to the source material we looked at, materialism often takes one of two routes when faced with these anomalies. The first, and probably the most common, is to summarily dismiss these events. Call them delusion, fraud, or statistical noise. Unquote. It's basically a way of saying, look, these things aren't real, or if they seem real, it's just a trick of the mind, a misinterpretation of random data, or maybe even someone's making it up. So for instance, NDEs are often chalked up to oxygen deprivation or brain chemicals causing hallucinations, things like that. And this approach, well, it effectively pushes the phenomena outside the realm of legitimate scientific inquiry. The second route, if they do try to offer an explanation, often involves inventing new forces, extra dimensions, or psi field. They're trying to build these new complex rooms onto the existing materialist house just to accommodate these weird anomalies. Imagine having a house designed for a certain purpose, and then you discover something that absolutely doesn't fit. Instead of questioning the house's fundamental design, you start adding these sort of bizarre extensions and hidden compartments just to make sense of the anomaly.
The source mentions something called Occam's razor being violated when materialism invents these new forces or fields. Now, for our listeners who might have heard the term but aren't quite sure what it means, maybe beyond a, medieval barber shop, can you quickly demystify that for us and then maybe explain how it applies here?
Good point. Occam's razor, it's actually a principle of problem solving, attributed to William of Ockham, a Franciscan friar from way back in the 14th century. In essence, it states that among competing hypotheses that explain a phenomenon, the one with the fewest assumptions should generally be preferred. Or, put more simply, the simplest explanation that accounts for all the data is usually the best one. It's about avoiding unnecessary complexity. Don't multiply entities beyond necessity, as they say. So when materialism encounters, say, telepathy, and it feels it has to invent an entirely new, unobservable force or maybe a hidden psi field through which thoughts can travel, it's adding a significant unproven assumption to its model. It's creating what we call an ad hoc entity, something specifically invented just to explain this one problem without independent evidence for it. And that goes against Occam's razor, which would suggest that if a simpler, more unified explanation for all of reality, including these phenomena, could be found, well, that would be preferable. This intellectual struggle really highlights how much the dominant materialist view strains to account for the actual data. It ends up pushing these experiences to the margins of scientific and philosophical inquiry, almost as if they just can't exist within the established framework. This creates a real impasse, a real problem. And that's precisely where Kastrup steps in with a truly elegant alternative.
Okay, so if materialism struggles so much to account for these, profound experiences, what's Bernardo Kastrup's radical solution? He talks about inverting the materialist assumption. What does that actually look like? It sounds almost like a philosophical magic trick, flipping our entire understanding of reality.
It's not magic, but it is a profoundly elegant and, in a way, simple shift in perspective. Instead of starting with matter, Kastrup's core idea, which he calls objective idealism, asserts that consciousness is the ontological primitive. Now, ontological primitive sounds a bit academic, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Let's break that down for you. It simply means that consciousness is the fundamental ground of all existence. It's the primary reality, the very source from which everything else arises. Think of it like this. In materialism, matter is the bedrock, and consciousness is like a decoration or maybe a late-stage development on top. In Kastrup's idealism, consciousness is the bedrock, and matter is what arises from it, or perhaps more accurately, how consciousness appears or manifests.
So it's not mind from matter, but rather matter as a perception of mind.
Oh,
That's a truly simple shift in wording, but wow, it's incredibly profound in its implications. It means the physical world as we perceive it isn't some objective, independent reality just sitting out there entirely separate from consciousness. Instead, it's a manifestation, maybe an experience or an appearance of this underlying universal consciousness.
Exactly. That's what the source calls the elegant inversion. It completely flips our conventional understanding on its head. And importantly, we're not talking about a subjective idealism where your individual mind creates your reality like a dream. That's a different idea. This is objective idealism. It proposes there's a universal fundamental consciousness, which Kastrup calls mind at large, and our experience of matter is how that consciousness manifests or appears to us from our localized perspectives. This single, elegant inversion, It really provides the foundation for a unified explanation of a whole wide spectrum of phenomena, including all those paranormal events we started with. It completely reorients our perspective on what's possible. It moves us away from a world of just dead, inert particles blindly following laws, towards a world fundamentally imbued with sentience, with experience.
And for you listening, I really encourage you to just pause for a second and consider how fundamentally different this is. Different from what you might have been taught, or maybe what you've just assumed your whole life. We're so steeped in the materialist view, it's almost like the air we breathe philosophically. So conceiving of consciousness as primary, as the foundation of everything, that's a truly radical mental leap. It doesn't just change how we see a few strange events, it potentially changes the very fabric of what reality could mean. Okay, to truly grasp Kastrup's model, we absolutely need to understand his central concept, mind at large. It sounds grand, almost cosmic, but how do we even conceive of something so all-encompassing? What exactly is it?
Mind at large is pretty much what it sounds like, but maybe even grander in its implications than the name suggests. It's defined as a single, universal, transpersonal field of consciousness. Now, this isn't just a metaphor for something vague or nebulous. Kastrup argues this is the actual fundamental ground of existence, the source from which absolutely everything springs. Think of it as the ultimate, all-encompassing consciousness of the universe, the primary reality itself. It's not a god in the traditional, anthropomorphic sense with a beard and judging people,
Right.
but maybe more like the living, experiencing fabric of reality itself. It's transpersonal because it goes beyond any individual person's mind. It encompasses all.
So if this mind at large is the fundamental ground, what about the physical universe? The stars, the planets, galaxies, even our own bodies. Are they somehow separate from this grand consciousness? Is it like mind at large is floating above or maybe around the universe?
No, and this is a really crucial distinction. It differentiates this kind of idealism from maybe other forms of spiritual thought you might encounter. In this model, the physical universe, everything we see, touch, measure, it's not separate from mind at large. Instead, it's simply the extrinsic appearance of its processes. Think of it this way. The universe is literally what universal mentation looks like from a certain localized perspective.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like the universe is the thought of mind at large, made manifest. Or maybe more accurately, the externalized experience of mind at large. It's not a thing apart from consciousness. It's the way consciousness expresses itself or experiences itself. To use an analogy, imagine a colossal, incredibly intricate dream. The dream itself is entirely a product of consciousness, right? Everything within that dream, the landscapes, the characters, the events, none of it is separate from the dreamer's mind. It's all just a dream, appearing in various forms. In the same way Kastrup suggests, the entire cosmos, with all its physical laws and structures, is an ongoing, dynamic manifestation of mind at large. This means the universe isn't just dead matter, blindly following mechanical laws. It's a living, mentating field. And that has profound implications for how we understand the nature of reality itself. It moves us beyond a purely mechanical, sort of clockwork view of the universe to something far more alive and interconnected. The very notion of dead matter kind of becomes obsolete in this framework. It's all part of this grand universal consciousness expressing itself.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and perhaps a bit mind-bending for me, maybe for you listening too. If there's one single mind at large, that's the universal consciousness, what about our individual minds? Mine, yours. Are we just tiny separate consciousnesses floating around, somehow generated by our personal brains? And if so, how does that fit into a single unified consciousness?
This is where Kastrup introduces a brilliant and, I think, surprisingly intuitive metaphor drawn from psychology, the concept of dissociation. He explains that individual conscious beings like you and me are not separate, discrete minds that somehow magically generate consciousness from scratch out of matter. Instead, he uses the well-documented psychological phenomenon of dissociation, like what you might see in dissociative identity disorder, sometimes called multiple personality disorder. In deity, a single mind expresses itself as multiple distinct personalities or alters, each with its own traits and memories, yet all stemming from one underlying psyche. Kastrup posits that we are, in a cosmic sense, simply dissociated alters of mind at large.
Dissociated alters. So we're like distinct personalities, but of the universe's consciousness itself. That's a really powerful idea. Can you give us an analogy, something to help us visualize that and really understand what being a dissociated alter means in this cosmic sense?
Absolutely. The source uses a vivid metaphor that I think truly captures it. Imagine a vast flowing stream or river. This river represents mind at large, the single continuous flow of universal consciousness. Now, as this river flows, it can naturally form countless seemingly separate whirlpools. These swirling eddies, they appear distinct from each other, right? Each has its own internal dynamics and temporary boundaries.
Yeah, I can picture that.
Yet, those whirlpools are nonetheless nothing but the stream itself. They are not independent entities that somehow create water. The water is already there. The whirlpool is merely a temporary, localized organization of that water. In the same way, Kastrup suggests, we are localized whirlpools of self-awareness within the single continuous river of universal consciousness. Our sense of individual identity, our unique thoughts and feelings, our distinct perspectives, these aren't illusions. They're real experiences. But they are the product of these temporary, necessary dissociative boundaries, the edges of the whirlpool, so to speak. So we are not truly separate from the stream. We are the stream, just temporarily organized in a specific individualized way. This allows for our unique subjective experience while maintaining that fundamental connection to the whole.
Wow. Okay, so if we are these whirlpools of universal consciousness, then what about our brains? The common belief, certainly in materialism, is that our brains create our consciousness. But you're saying Kastrup sees it fundamentally differently. If the stream is consciousness, what's the brain's actual role in all of this?
This is a really crucial point for listeners to grasp because it completely inverts the conventional understanding we're all used to. Our brains, in this idealist model, are not generators of consciousness. They don't produce it like a factory produces goods. Instead, they are its localizers and filters. Think of it like this. Imagine the vast, unbound awareness of mind at large, like an infinitely bright, all-encompassing light. Our brain's function, then, is to constrict that boundless awareness, to dim and focus that infinite light into a specific point-of-view experience necessary for survival. It's often explained with the keyhole analogy. Imagine mind at large as everything happening outside a locked room. We are mind at large looking at itself through a keyhole, and that keyhole is our neurobiology. Our brains don't create the light or the view outside the room, but they act like the keyhole, focusing the infinite awareness into a manageable, limited perspective. This allows us to interact effectively with the physical world, to distinguish ourselves from our environment, and navigate daily life. Without this filter, without this keyhole, we would likely be overwhelmed by the sheer totality of existence, unable to function as discrete biological organisms. The brain ensures our consciousness is narrowed down to a specific useful stream of experience. And this concept, it elegantly solves what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness.
Ah, yes, the hard problem, how matter makes mind.
Exactly. The question is, how does purely physical stuff, neurons firing, chemicals reacting, give rise to subjective experience, to qualia, to the feeling of being something, the redness of red, the sadness of grief? Kastrup solves it by flipping it on its head. It's not about matter somehow generating consciousness. It's about consciousness localizing and filtering itself through specific biological structures, like the brain. This is a huge shift in philosophical thought because it bypasses the most intractable problem in neuroscience and philosophy of mind. It transforms it from a question of creation to one of localization.
This really forces us to reconsider, doesn't it? What would it actually mean if your consciousness wasn't created by your brain but merely funneled through it? It's like your brain is maybe a radio receiver, not the broadcaster. The music, the signal, is always there in the airwaves, mind at large, but the radio tunes into a specific station, filtering out all the other static and noise. That's a truly profound shift in how we might understand ourselves and our place in the universe. And if our brains are merely filters of a broader consciousness, not its generators, then suddenly many of the impossible phenomena we discussed earlier, things like extrasensory perception, might not seem so impossible after all. In fact, you're saying Kastrup suggests they're precisely what we'd expect.
Exactly. It tackles them beautifully, logically. Under materialism, remember, things like extrasensory perception or psi phenomena, telepathy, clairvoyance, they're conceptually impossible, or at least very, very difficult to explain. Why? Because information can't just magically travel between two separate brains or across vast distances without some known physical medium. It would violate everything we understand about how physics works, about locality. But in Kastrup's idealism, the problem simply vanishes. It dissolves. It vanishes because the fundamental assumption has changed completely. We're no longer talking about separate, isolated entities trying somehow to communicate across a physical void. Instead, we reiterate that all individual consciousness, all our individual whirlpools are fundamentally part of the same single mind at large. Therefore, the walls of our individual psyche, our sense of separation, they are not absolute impenetrable barriers. They are merely dissociative boundaries. They are the metaphorical membranes of the whirlpool, keeping our individual experience distinct for practical purposes, but fundamentally they are made of the same universal consciousness, the same water.
Okay, so if these boundaries aren't absolute, that implies they can become permeable, leaky maybe. And this permeability is the key to understanding psi phenomena.
Precisely. That's the core idea. The source explains that under certain conditions, maybe conditions of resonance, focus, or emotional intensity, these boundaries can indeed become permeable. This is the key mechanism. When they become permeable, information doesn't need to travel across space in the way a radio signal or a light wave does. That's the materialist sticking point. Instead, information simply resonates within the unified field that both alters or individual consciousness already inhabit. Imagine two ripples in a pond again. They appear distinct, but the water of the pond connects them intrinsically. They can influence each other simply by virtue of being in the same medium. The information isn't sent from A to B, it's already there in the shared medium, and the temporary permeability allows one part of the medium, one mind, to become aware of what's happening in another part, another mind.
That makes a lot of sense. It shifts the paradigm completely from sending a signal to sharing or accessing something already present. So let's take telepathy, the apparent direct transfer of thoughts or emotions. How does Kastrup reimagine this specifically in his model?
Telepathy in this framework is reconceptualized. It's not a signal sent from one isolated mind to another. That would imply a distinct sending action, like, I don't know, firing a thought bullet across a void. Instead, it's understood as information leakage between two dissociated alters within the same mental medium. Since we are all manifestations of mind at large, sharing the same fundamental mental substance, our individual minds are not truly separate at the deepest level. The information, the thought, the feeling, the image is already immanent. That means inherent and present within the universal field that connects us all. When the dissociative boundaries temporarily thin or become permeable, perhaps due to resonance or a strong emotional bond between two people, well, then thoughts, emotions, or images from one whirlpool can naturally spill over or be perceived by another. It's like two people drawing in different sections of the same vast sandbox. If the boundary between their sections temporarily fades or vanishes, their drawings might blend, or one might suddenly become aware of the other's drawing without anything being sent across. This reframes it from something supernatural, something that breaks natural laws, into a natural, albeit maybe rare, consequence of our fundamental unity within mind at large. It's not about sending, it's about shared access. It's about momentarily experiencing a part of the stream that also constitutes another whirlpool. It's really an internal phenomenon of mind at large, rather than an external interaction between distinct separate entities.
Okay, that explanation for telepathy feels quite coherent within the model. So if telepathy is information leakage, how does Kastrup's idealism make sense of clairvoyance? You know, the knowledge of distant objects or events without direct sensory input. This feels even more challenging, maybe, as it often involves perceiving something far away, perhaps without another person involved to leak thoughts from.
Right, it builds directly on the previous concept, but maybe applies it on a grander scale. As Kastrup argues, the entire universe is the extrinsic appearance of the thoughts of mind at large, meaning the universe is what universal consciousness looks like or experiences, then it logically follows that all information about the universe is immanent within this universal field. Remember, immanent. It means inherent, dwelling within, intrinsic to. The information isn't stored somewhere out there in a separate physical realm, waiting for us to find it with some weird psychic sensor. It's already present within this foundational consciousness that constitutes all of reality.
So the clairvoyant isn't literally seeing a distant room through walls or over miles using some kind of, I don't know, psychic vision beam, but rather they're accessing a pattern directly from the universal mind itself.
Precisely. That's the idea. A clairvoyant is not seeing a distant location through some mysterious psychic sense in the way we use our physical eyes. Rather, their consciousness is momentarily transcending its tight localization, its usual narrow keyhole perspective. And in doing so, it's accessing an informational pattern within mind at large that corresponds to that distant event or object. Now, think of it like this. If the universe is the ongoing thought or experience of mind at large, all those details and patterns are already there within mind at large itself. The clairvoyant simply gains a fleeting ability to perceive a part of that larger thought, that larger pattern, that isn't usually available to their specific localized perspective. The analogy of the whirlpool expanding again is helpful here. They are, in a sense, slightly expanding their whirlpool to encompass another part of the stream that holds the informational pattern of that distant event or object. It's an internal access to universal information. It's a momentary widening of the keyhole, not an external seeing of a separate physical thing through impossible means. And this transforms seeing the unseen, from some kind of magical ability into a logical extension of shared universal consciousness. It's like finding a chapter in a colossal book that you didn't know you had access to before.
Okay, perhaps the most challenging psi phenomenon for any theory, I think, is precognition, knowing something before it happens. This really throws a wrench in our usual understanding of time, doesn't it? Time feels so linear, always moving forward, cause and effect. How can something that hasn't happened yet be known?
It absolutely does challenge our notions of time, and Kastrup tackles this head on by, well, challenging our very perception of time itself. He argues that linear time is a feature of our localized, filtered perspective.
Yeah.
It's a product of the way our individual consciousness, our alter, or whirlpool, processes information sequentially, one thing after another. We experience reality as a succession of moments, past, then present, then future. And this linear sequential experience is incredibly useful for navigating our physical world, for our biological survival. It helps us make sense of cause and effect, plan, learn from the past.
So you're saying mind at large doesn't experience time the way we do, moment by moment, like it sees the whole movie at once?
Something like that, yes. For the mind at large, which is the ground of all reality, encompasses everything, time may not be a linear progression, but a holistic transtemporal structure. Transtemporal just means beyond or transcending time as we typically understand it. In this fundamental universal consciousness, past, present, and future could exist as a unified informational pattern. Imagine it less like a moving train on a track going from station to station, and more like a vast, complete painting, or maybe a finished sculpture, where all elements and moments exist simultaneously, holistically. We, as localized alters, only perceive one small segment of the painting or sculpture at a time, moving our focus across it linearly. And that creates our experience of time's passage. A precognitive experience, then, is understood as a rare instance where an alter gains access to a segment of this pattern that, from his linear perspective, has not yet happened. It's not necessarily that the future is fixed in some rigid deterministic sense, that's a whole other debate about free will, but rather that the entire script, or the entire pattern of universal consciousness, might exist in a unified way at the fundamental level. A precognitive glimpse is therefore like a glimpse of the script of universal consciousness before it is performed in the theater of our perception. It's like peeking ahead at a later chapter in a book that's already been written in its entirety, even if you're only reading the current chapter right now. And this raises a really important and profound question about the very nature of time itself. Is it an objective reality that exists out there regardless of us, flowing like a river? Or is it a construct of our localized, filtered perception? Kastrup leans strongly towards the latter. He suggests that time, as we experience it, is more like a processing constraint of our individual consciousness rather than an ultimate feature of reality itself.
That's a truly mind-bending idea, suggesting time isn't a river we're flowing down, but perhaps a landscape we're only able to perceive piece by piece, sequentially. Now, shifting gears slightly, but building on this, Kastrup's philosophy really seems to shine when it comes to phenomena suggesting consciousness survives bodily death, especially near-death experiences, NDEs. These accounts are often incredibly vivid, profound, and remarkably consistent across cultures, yet they pose a huge challenge for materialism.
They absolutely do. It's worth reminding listeners again that the materialist model struggles immensely here. It struggles to explain the clarity, the often spiritual or transpersonal nature, and the profound meaning reported in NDEs. Especially because these experiences often occur when the brain is severely compromised, maybe flatlining on an EEG or clinically non-functional, sometimes even when all measurable brain activity has ceased. If consciousness is solely a product of brain activity, how can such rich, meaningful, coherent experiences arise when there's effectively no brain activity to generate them? Materialism often resorts to explanations like hallucination, maybe dream states or random firing of dying brain cells. But those explanations rarely seem to account for the coherence, the shared core themes across diverse individuals. And crucially, they often fail to explain the verified out-of-body perceptions sometimes reported, where individuals accurately describe events or details that took place in the room, or even outside the room, while they were clinically dead or unconscious.
So, how does Kastrup's idealism explain this apparent paradox? For him, these aren't just anomalies to be explained away, are they?
No, not at all. For Kastrup, this clarity and richness during brain malfunction is exactly what we should expect in an idealist universe where consciousness is primary. In his model, the process of dying is not the end of consciousness. It's a transformation. It's a process of delocalization. As the brain begins to die, its crucial role as a filtering mechanism breaks down. Remember the keyhole analogy? That keyhole is deteriorating, it's widening, it's losing its ability to constrict the vastness of mind at large. The dissociative boundary of the altar weakens. The whirlpool of individual consciousness begins to dissolve back into the wider stream of mind at large. This isn't annihilation, it's a delocalization process. The individual consciousness is slowly reintegrating into the universal consciousness from which it originated, much like a whirlpool smoothly dissipating back into the main flow of the river.
That makes so much sense of what NDE experiencers often describe. It seems to perfectly account for those core features we hear about so often, like that overwhelming sense of peace and unity, right?
Precisely. This delocalization process perfectly accounts for many core NDE features.
Yeah.
First, that overwhelming feeling of cosmic unity and oneness, often reported. That's interpreted as the direct experience of re-emerging with mind at large, where the individual sense of self, the whirlpool boundary, starts to dissolve, and the person experiences their fundamental connection to all existence.
Okay.
Second, the life review, where people report their entire life flashing before their eyes, or reliving key moments with profound emotional insight. That's explained as the altar's entire informational pattern, all its memories, experiences, thoughts becoming accessible at once. It's no longer constrained by the linear, sequential filtering of the brain. It's like seeing the whole tapestry or painting of your life simultaneously. And third, those encounters with deceased relatives or beings of light. They're understood not necessarily as meeting physically resurrected entities in some other place, but as perceiving the informational patterns or traces of other altars who are already fully reintegrated into the universal field. They aren't ghosts in the traditional sense, but accessible informational patterns within mind at large itself. So this provides a deeply coherent and importantly non-supernatural explanation for something often dismissed as mere hallucination or a symptom of oxygen deprivation. It turns NDEs from an unexplained anomaly into potential direct evidence for the fundamental primary nature of consciousness and its possible survival beyond the physical brain.
That's a really powerful reframing, and I imagine it offers a profound sense of meaning, maybe even comfort, for many have had these experiences or heard these accounts. Now, what about apparitions and ghosts? Do they still haunt us in Kastrup's model, or are they interpreted as something else entirely? Many traditional ghost stories involve the lingering spirit of a specific person, right?
Right, the traditional view is often of a distinct spirit stuck between worlds or something. But in Kastrup's view, they are not the disembodied spirits of the dead in that traditional sense, like haunting a physical landscape with their full personality intact. That would still imply a separate, persisting individual mind after death in a way that doesn't fully align with the reintegration concept, where the individual consciousness, the whirlpool, dissolves back into the greater mind at large.
So how are they reframed then? If they're not lingering spirits, what are they? Echoes.
Echoes is a good way to put it. Instead, apparitions and ghosts can be understood as persistent informational patterns or thought forms within mind at large. Imagine a really powerful event, maybe a traumatic event, as the source suggests, happened in a particular location. Such an event, being deeply impressed upon the fabric of reality, which is consciousness itself in this model, might create a particularly intense and resilient dissociative process, a psychic scar in the fabric of universal consciousness. It's like an incredibly strong memory or emotional imprint that, rather than fading completely, leaves a very durable echo or residue in the underlying universal consciousness associated with that place or context. This lingering pattern can then be perceived by living individuals whose own filters are sufficiently sensitive or porous to pick up on it. Just as maybe a medium might have a more permeable boundary to universal information, some individuals might simply be more naturally attuned or sensitive to these residual informational patterns in certain environments. So the ghost is not a person. It is the informational echo of a person's experience, impressed upon the very medium of reality. It's like a re-experiencing of an energetic or emotional imprint, a kind of residual memory playing out, not necessarily an encounter with a distinct conscious entity that's still there as an individual. It's more like perceiving a pattern within the mind at large itself.
That's a fascinating reinterpretation. It really does challenge us to rethink our perception of a ghost. It's not the person, but an echo of the person or their experience built into the fabric of reality itself. It's kind of like finding a lingering scent in a room long after the person who wore the perfume has left. The person is gone, but the impression remains. And maybe it's accessible under the right conditions or to the right nose. Okay, and if apparitions are these echoes, what about mediumship? where individuals claim to communicate directly with the deceased. If the individual consciousness dissolves back into mind at large, how can a medium talk to someone who is supposedly reintegrated and no longer a distinct individual? It feels like a potential contradiction there.
That's a very perceptive question, and yes, it seems contradictory at first glance. But Kastrup's model provides a nuanced and, I think, coherent explanation. A medium in this view is not necessarily like a telephone operator for the dead, making direct two-way calls to individual spirits hanging out in some afterlife who are somehow still separate individuals. That's a very common, but maybe overly simplistic understanding promoted in popular culture.
So what is their role then, if not direct communication with a separate spirit?
Rather, a medium could be understood as an individual with an unusually permeable dissociative boundary. Remember that idea of Linky filters. They might possess a natural or perhaps a practiced ability to relax their own egoic localization, to essentially lessen the tight filtering of their own brain, to widen their keyhole perspective temporarily. This allows them to access the vast information repository of mind at large itself, the whole stream, not just their whirlpool. So when they provide specific, accurate information about a deceased individual information they couldn't possibly know through normal means, they are tapping into the informational trace that person left behind, the unique pattern of thoughts, memories, and dispositions that constituted their alter before it dissolved back into the whole. Think of it more like accessing a historical record or a detailed personal archive within the universal consciousness. The individual personality, the unique whirlpool, may have fully merged back into the stream, but the unique patterns and experiences that define that whirlpool likely left a persistent imprint, an informational trace, within mind at large, like ripples spreading out. The medium is simply someone who is able to perceive and interpret these traces, extracting details that can then be validated by those who knew the deceased person. This offers a deeply rational and, again, non-supernatural explanation for phenomena that have baffled and intrigued humanity for millennia. It provides a coherent framework for understanding experiences often dismissed as mere trickery or wishful thinking. It's like tapping into the universal library of experience.
Okay, so pulling this all together, what's the big takeaway here? After exploring how Kastrup's idealism reframes all these different phenomena, from psi to NDEs to ghosts, what makes his framework so compelling, especially when you compare it to the challenges faced by materialism?
I think the profound strength of Kastrup's framework lies in what philosophers call its parsimony and its huge explanatory breadth. Parsimony means simplicity, right? Using the fewest fundamental assumptions to explain the most data. So unlike materialism, which, as we discussed, must either deny the data or invent ad hoc entities to explain it, meaning it has to keep adding these new, unproven, often highly complex concepts like hidden dimensions or specialized psi fields just to make sense of the paranormal. Idealism, at least Kastrup's version, posits only one fundamental substance: consciousness. That's it. One fundamental thing at the base of everything.
And from that single substance, he manages to build a whole coherent universe, explaining so much more than just the paranormal phenomena.
Exactly. From the dynamics of this single substance, specifically its ability to undergo processes like dissociation, localization, and resonance, a coherent explanation emerges for everything from quantum non-locality to the visions of a dying patient. And let's maybe touch on quantum non-locality again for a moment, because it's such a critical point where physics bumps up against these ideas. Remember that perplexing phenomenon where two entangled particles, even if they're light years apart, seem to instantaneously know about and affect each other's state?
Yeah, Einstein's spooky action at a distance.
Exactly. For materialism, this is deeply problematic. It appears to defy the fundamental principle of locality, the notion that information can't travel faster than light. It's an enormous conceptual hurdle. But in Kastrup's idealism, where everything is fundamentally interconnected within a single conscious field, within mind at large, such immediate correlation isn't a paradox at all. Those entangled particles are not truly separate entities, somehow communicating across a void faster than light. They are, at their deepest level, interconnected expressions of the same underlying universal consciousness. Their instantaneous influence isn't communication across space. It's simply a manifestation of their inherent unity within mind at large. The connection is already fundamentally there because they are part of the same thing. So the paranormal, in this view, is thus naturalized. It's no longer a collection of spooky what-ifs or violations of nature's laws. Instead, it becomes a set of data points hinting at the true, unified, and mental nature of the cosmos. These experiences tell us something fundamental about reality, rather than being inexplicable anomalies we have to ignore or explain away. And that, I think, is the beauty of a truly elegant theory. It brings order and understanding to what seemed like a chaotic collection of anomalies, showing them all to be potentially part of one grand coherent picture.
That's a really compelling argument for its explanatory power and its elegance. But, okay, here's the big question, the one probably nagging at many listeners right now. If we're all swimming in this universal mental sea, if our boundaries are inherently permeable, why aren't paranormal events happening all the time? Why are they generally so rare and often unreliable? If we're all just whirlpools in the same stream, shouldn't we be constantly experiencing telepathy or knowing the future or seeing echoes? This is a really common question and a really important one because it's often the first objection people raise to idealism.
It's an excellent and absolutely necessary challenge, yes. And Kastrup directly addresses it. His answer is rooted firmly in, believe it or not, evolutionary biology. The brain's filtering function is extraordinarily effective precisely because it is essential for our survival as biological organisms. Think about it from a practical standpoint. If your individual consciousness, your whirlpool, was constantly merging with other whirlpools, or if you were perceiving the entirety of mind at large all the time, you wouldn't be able to distinguish yourself from others or focus on the immediate practical tasks of finding food, avoiding predators, building shelter, having a conversation. Our distinct sense of individuality, fostered by this biological filter, is crucial for survival in a complex physical environment. Any significant leakage of information from mind at large or between alters would be profoundly disorienting and maladaptive for our daily functioning. Imagine trying to drive a car while simultaneously experiencing the thoughts and anxieties of everyone around you.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Chaos. Or having a constant stream of overwhelming information about potential future events, or merging with a sense of cosmic oneness every few minutes. It would be utterly overwhelming and prevent us from navigating our physical reality effectively. Therefore, psi phenomena and NDEs are likely not fundamental features designed for us to experience constantly. They are perhaps better understood as glitches in the localization mechanism. They are rare moments when the filter temporarily malfunctions or weakens or becomes unusually permeable for some reason, offering a fleeting, maybe accidental glimpse beyond our usual keyhole perception.
And this would also explain why these phenomena are so notoriously difficult to consistently replicate in scientific experiments, right? Which demand repeatability. If they're glitches, they're inherently unpredictable.
Precisely. The very nature of a glitch is that it's an exception, not the rule. Our everyday conscious experience is fine-tuned by evolution for optimal survival and navigation, which means filtering out the vast majority of mind at large. To consistently reproduce these experiences on demand in a lab would require either a profound and persistent weakening of the brain's natural filter, which again would likely be maladaptive for the person experiencing it, or it would require a level of precise control over consciousness, attention, and resonance that current scientific methods simply don't possess. We don't know how to reliably induce these states. So the unreliability and rarity, far from being a weakness of the idealist model, are actually a strong prediction of the model, deeply integrated with our understanding of evolution and the brain's primary purpose. It's not about making us all psychic all the time. It's about helping us navigate reality effectively and survive as individuals. The filter is there for a very good reason, and its general effectiveness explains the rarity of these glitches.
And there you have it. Bernardo Kastrup's philosophy provides what we believe, based on this analysis, is arguably the most intellectually satisfying and logically rigorous framework currently available for understanding these persistent paranormal phenomena. It truly allows us to move beyond the sterile confines of materialism, which, for all its undeniable strengths in explaining the physical world, simply cannot seem to account for these experiences without significant conceptual gymnastics or sometimes outright denial.
It gives us a new language, a new model, to treat these anomalous experiences not as mere superstitions to be debunked, or as flights of fancy or signs of mental instability, but potentially as valuable clues, as data points hinting at the ultimate nature of reality itself. It fundamentally changes our perception of what's natural and what might be labeled supernatural. Perhaps nothing is truly supernatural if reality itself is mind.
In this profound vision, a telepathic insight that seems to cross minds, a clairvoyant vision of a distant event, or the profound transformative final journey of someone experiencing an NDE. These are not intrusions of the supernatural into the natural world. They are not breaking any fundamental rules of the cosmos, if consciousness is the rule.
Rather, as the source beautifully puts it, they could be the whispers and echoes of the universal mind, momentarily breaking through the filter of our individual awareness, reminding us that the whirlpool is, and always has been, part of the stream.
So for you, our listener, reflecting on all this, What does this mean? Does exploring this perspective shift your own view on what's possible? What new questions does this provoke for your own understanding of consciousness, of reality, and of the universe around you? So it's definitely a lot to mull over, and we really encourage you to keep diving deep into these fascinating and maybe reality-altering ideas.